The weight of the silver tray was a familiar ache in my wrist, a cold promise against my skin. Around me, the ballroom buzzed with the sound of 1,000 meaningless conversations, the clinking of crystal, the low thrum of a string quartet butchering a pop song. It was a symphony of wealth I served but could never join. Each flute of champagne I delivered was worth more than my entire week's rent. I was 18, and this was my life. A ghost in a red vest and a starched white shirt, refilling glasses for people who never once met my eyes. I moved through the glittering crowd with an economy of motion I'd perfected over months of this work. A smile here, a polite murmur there. Keep your head down, your tray steady, and your thoughts to yourself. It was a simple set of rules. Tonight, they wouldn't be enough. It started with a look. A man in a dark blue police uniform, his chest puffed out with the self-importance of a man who mistakes a badge for a crown, was staring at me. Not at the tray, not at the champagne, but at me. His eyes, small and hard, raked over me with a calculated disdain that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. He was older, his face florid and etched with the permanent scowl of someone who believes the world owes him constant deference. The gold captain's bars on his collar gleamed under the chandelier light. I ignored him, turning to offer a glass to a woman draped in diamonds. She took it without a word, her attention fixed on the man beside her. That was how it was supposed to work. I was furniture, useful but unnoticed. But the captain was not like the others. He stepped directly into my path as I turned, forcing me to a sudden halt. The champagne on my tray sloshed, a tiny, dangerous tide. "You," he said. His voice was a low growl, meant to carry only to me, yet loud enough to command the space around us. I kept my expression neutral, my training kicking in. "Sir, can I get you something?" "I've been watching you," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "You don't belong here." I could have said 1,000 things. I work here. I belong here more than you, who is probably just security for some politician. Instead, I said nothing. Silence was safer. "You've been casing the room," he accused, his voice rising just enough to curdle the atmosphere nearby. A few people glanced over, their curiosity piqued. Looking for an opportunity. A wallet left on a table, a purse unattended. My blood ran cold. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of humiliation. He saw my face, my uniform, my youth, and he had already written an entire story in his head. A story where I was the villain. "Sir, I'm just doing my job," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I would not let it tremble. I would not give him that satisfaction. He let out a short, ugly laugh. "Your job? Or your cover?" He took another step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You have a suspicious look about you. A guilty 1 inch. My hands tightened on the tray. Every survival instinct screamed at me to walk away, to find my manager, to disappear. But I was frozen, pinned by the sheer audacity of his prejudice. He was performing, showing the glittering patrons that he was on watch, protecting them from people like me. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," he said, his hand moving toward his belt. "On what grounds?" The question was out before I could stop it. It was too sharp, too defiant. His eyes flashed with anger. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone he had already dismissed as less than nothing. "On the grounds that I'm a captain of the police department and you look like a thief. Now put the tray down." Slowly, the small circle of silence around us had widened. People were watching openly now, their champagne flutes paused halfway to their lips. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, stripping me bare. My face burned with a shame so hot it felt like a fever. I placed the tray on a nearby empty table, my movements stiff and robotic. The moment my hands were free, he grabbed my right wrist. His grip was brutal, a vice of flesh and bone. "You're coming with me. We'll sort this out downtown." "You can't do this," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Watch me," he pulled my arm behind my back, the angle sharp and painful. The metallic click echoed in the sudden hush of the ballroom. The cold, unforgiving steel of the handcuff clamped around my wrist. He was arresting me. Here. In the middle of this grand gala, in front of everyone. For looking suspicious. He was making an example of me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way at my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to breathe, trying to hold on to the last shred of my composure. And that is when the world changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a shift in the air, a sudden drop in temperature. The low hum of the crowd didn't just quiet. It was extinguished, snuffed out like a candle flame. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, absolute, and terrified. I opened my eyes. He stood in the grand archway of the ballroom, a silhouette against the bright lights of the foyer. He was not a large man, but he commanded space as if he were a law of physics. The room seemed to bend around him, the light, the air, the attention of every person within it. Kwon Jihan, my husband. He wore a custom suit of charcoal wool so dark it was almost black. It fit his lean frame with a precision that suggested it was crafted by an artist, not a tailor. His hands were in his pockets, a deceptively casual posture that did nothing to soften the lethal stillness he projected. His face was a mask of cold, aristocratic beauty, his black hair styled perfectly, not a single strand out of place. But it was his eyes that held the room hostage. They were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb the light, and they were fixed on the scene in the center of the room. On the police captain's hand on my arm, on the glint of steel at my wrist. He did not raise his voice. He did not move quickly. He simply began to walk toward us, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. With every step he took, the fear in the room intensified. Men who ran corporations and countries seemed to shrink in his presence. Women adorned in jewels clutched their partner's arms. They knew who he was. The head of the Korean syndicate that ran this city's shadows, the unseen hand that moved pieces on a board they couldn't even comprehend. Captain Miller, however, was insulated by his own arrogance. He hadn't noticed the change in the room yet. He was too focused on his prey. He tugged on my arm, trying to pull me toward the exit. Let's go. You can make your phone call from the station. Jihan stopped a few feet away. He did not look at the captain.
He looked only at me.
His gaze was unreadable, a deep, dark well of something I couldn't name. I saw a flicker in their depths, a spark of something ancient and predatory. It was a look that stripped away everything, the ballroom, the uniform, the handcuffs, until there was only him and me. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, a low, smooth baritone that cut through the silence, like a razor. Captain. He said the title with an inflection that turned it from a sign of respect into an insult. Captain Miller finally looked up, his face a mask of irritation. Who the hell are you? This is official police business. Stay back. Jihan's eyes slowly, deliberately, moved from my face to the captain's hand gripping my arm. He tilted his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it held no warmth. It was the baring of teeth. You have made a mistake, Jihan said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, as calm and certain as a weather forecast predicting a hurricane. The captain's face flushed a deeper red. He was a man who thrived on intimidation, and he was being challenged. I am placing this woman under arrest. She fits the description of a suspect in a series of thefts in this area. Now, if you'll excuse me. She fits the description, Jihan repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Tell me, Captain, what is the description? The captain faltered for a second, caught off guard.
Young.
Works service jobs. Moves around places like this, looking for opportunities, he trailed off, realizing how flimsy it sounded. I see, Jihan took another step forward. He was so close now I could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something like cedar and cold night air. He finally looked at Captain Miller, and for the first time, a sliver of uncertainty seemed to pierce the captain's thick hide. He was starting to realize he was not talking to just some concerned citizen. You will release my wife, Jihan said. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. My wife. The captain's jaw went slack. His eyes darted from Jihan's impassive face to my own. Confusion warred with disbelief on his features. Your wife?" he stammered. This girl is a waitress." "She is," Jihan agreed, his tone deceptively pleasant. "And she is my wife. And you have put your hands on her. So, I will ask you one more time. Release her."
Now.
The captain, his brain finally catching up to the reality of the situation, began to sweat. He had seen Jihan's face in classified briefings.
He knew the name.
Kwon Jihan was not a man you arrested. He was a man you prayed you never had to meet. And he had just arrested his wife. With fumbling, trembling fingers, the captain unlocked the handcuff. The steel fell away from my wrist, leaving a raw, red mark. I instinctively cradled my hand, the feeling of freedom so abrupt it was dizzying. Jihan's eyes flickered down to the red mark on my skin. The cold mask on his face tightened, becoming something harder, something made of carved ice. He looked back at the captain, whose face had gone pale, the color of old parchment. "My associate will take your statement outside," Jihan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. A man in a suit, who had seemingly appeared from nowhere, stepped forward and placed a firm hand on the captain's shoulder. The captain looked like he was going to be sick. "Wait, it was a misunderstanding," he pleaded, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a desperate, animal fear. "There is no misunderstanding," Jihan said, his back already turned to the captain as if he no longer existed.
He was looking only at me.
The man in the suit guided the captain away, his protests dying as they moved toward the exit. The ballroom began to breathe again, conversations restarting in hushed, frantic whispers. The show was over. But for me, it was just beginning. "Are you all right, Aaliyah?" Jihan asked, his voice for my ears only. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. My wrist throbbed, a dull, humiliating ache. He saw me looking at it, and his expression, for a fraction of a second, was unguarded. What I saw there wasn't just anger. It was a deep, possessive fury that was almost frightening in its intensity. It was the look of a king whose most prized possession had been scratched. He reached out his long, elegant fingers gently taking my hand. He turned it over, his thumb brushing over the red, chafed skin. His touch was surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to the violence I knew he was capable of. It sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. "This will not happen again," he murmured. It was a vow. He still held my hand, his grip firm, but not painful. He looked around the room, his eyes sweeping over the curious faces, the whispers, the stares. He was staking a claim, drawing a line in the sand for all to see. I was not just a waitress. I was his. And an insult to me was an insult to him. I understood, in that moment, that the invisible cage I had lived in since our arranged marriage had just become a fortress. And I wasn't sure if its walls were meant to keep others out or to keep me in. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze and then released it. "Go and get your things," he said, his voice once again cool and controlled. "We are leaving." He didn't offer me an escape, a way to fade back into the anonymity of the staff. He was taking me out the front door with him. He was making a statement. I swallowed hard, the last vestiges of the girl who just wanted to get through her shift disappearing. I walked toward the staff locker room, my legs unsteady, feeling the weight of his eyes on my back with every step. The red vest and white shirt felt like a costume I was about to shed for good. I didn't know what I was changing into, only that there was no going back. In the small, cramped locker room, I leaned against the cool metal, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a shaky, hollow feeling in its wake. I peeled off the uniform vest, my fingers clumsy. My life had been cleaved in two, the time before Jihan walked into that ballroom, and the time after. I had married him 6 months ago, a deal made between him and my father to settle a debt I never knew existed. It was a business transaction. I was the collateral. We lived in the same sprawling, minimalist penthouse overlooking the city, but we moved in separate orbits. He was a creature of night and silence, a man who spoke in calculations and moved with a purpose I could never quite grasp. I was a student, a waitress, a girl trying to pretend her life hadn't been sold. He had laid out the terms with cold precision on our wedding night. He would provide for me, protect me, and ask for nothing in return except my discretion and my presence at certain events. Our marriage was a shield for him, a way to project an image of stability. And for 6 months it had worked. We were polite strangers sharing a roof. I saw him in the mornings, a fleeting shadow in a perfect suit, and sometimes late at night, when he would stand on the balcony, staring out at the city that was his kingdom. But what happened tonight, that wasn't part of the deal. The cold fury in his eyes, the possessive way he'd said my wife, that was something new. Something that terrified and intrigued me in equal measure. He had protected me, yes, but it felt like more than that. It felt like he was protecting something that belonged to him. I changed into my simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, and stuffed the uniform into my bag. When I walked back out, he was waiting for me, standing near a towering floral arrangement, looking as out of place and as perfectly in control as a panther in a gilded cage. He turned as I approached, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, as if checking for any other damage. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. He led the way, and the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. The whispers followed us, a ripple of speculation and fear. As we stepped out into the cool night air, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its engine a low, contented purr. The driver, a man built like a mountain, got out and opened the back door. Jihan placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me inside. The touch was light, impersonal, yet it burned through the fabric of my sweater. The car was a cocoon of black leather and silence, smelling of the same cedar scent that clung to him. The door closed, shutting out the world. We drove in silence for several minutes, the city lights a blur of fractured color through the tinted windows. I stared out at them, my reflection a pale, wide-eyed ghost. I could feel him watching me. "The captain's name was Miller," he said finally, his voice calm. "He has a 30-year career, a wife, 2 daughters in college, a pension he was looking forward to." The use of the past tense was not lost on me. "What will happen to him?" I asked, my voice small. "He will be retired," Jihan said. The word was sterile, clean, but the meaning behind it was anything but. Miller's life, as he knew it, was over. Because he had insulted me. Because he had embarrassed Jihan. No one will put their hands on you again. I thought of the raw mark on my wrist, the public humiliation. A part of me, a dark, vengeful part one didn't know I had, was glad. But another part was horrified. The power he wielded was absolute, terrifying. To erase a man's life over a slight, a mistake born of arrogance and prejudice, it was the power of a god or a monster. He was wrong to do what he did, I said, choosing my words carefully. But his family. Jihan turned to look at me fully. In the dim light of the car, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. "They have nothing to do with this. His daughters will find their tuition is paid for by an anonymous benefactor. His wife will receive his full pension. I am not a savage, Aliyah. I am precise." His precision was what scared me the most. He moved through the world like a surgeon, excising threats with cold, clean cuts. There was no passion in it, only calculation. Except for tonight. Tonight, in the ballroom, I had seen something that wasn't calculated. That flash of fury in his eyes had been pure, unadulterated emotion. It was the first real emotion I had ever seen from him. We arrived at the penthouse. The elevator opened directly into the vast living space, a cavern of white marble, black furniture, and glass walls that offered a breathtaking view of the city. It was beautiful, but it had never felt like a home. It was a museum, and I was just another exhibit. Jihan walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of water. He handed one to me. Our fingers brushed. A jolt, small but unmistakable, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back quickly. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," I said, needing to fill the silence. "My plans changed," he said simply. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the glittering tapestry of lights below. Park Min-joon was there, from the Ilson family. He has been making moves on my shipping routes. I needed to make an appearance, so that was it. It was about business. His anger wasn't just for me. It was because Miller had created a scene, a disruption, in front of one of his rivals. It was a show of weakness. The realization was a cold splash of water, extinguishing the strange warmth that had begun to kindle inside me. Of course, it was always about the business, the empire. As if sensing my thoughts, he turned from the window. What Miller did was an inconvenience. It created a ripple I will now have to smooth, but that is not why I was angry. He walked toward me, closing the space between us until he stood just a foot away. He was taller than I realized, and I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. When I walked in and saw his hands on you, he said, his voice a low thrum, I saw a loose end. A liability. A problem I needed to solve. He paused, his dark eyes searching my face. But that was not all I saw.
My heart started to beat faster.
There was a woman I was supposed to protect once, he said, his voice taking on a distant, almost haunted quality. My younger sister. She was vibrant, reckless. She trusted the wrong person. A man from a rival family. I warned her, but she thought she knew better. They used her to get to my father. By the time I found her, it was too late. He looked away, back toward the city lights, but I knew he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing a memory. I was young, not yet in charge. I couldn't protect her, he continued, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion the story demanded. I swore I would never fail like that again. Anyone under my roof, under my name, is my responsibility. An absolute 1 inch. He was giving me an explanation. Kwon Ji-han, the man who never explained himself to anyone, was explaining his actions to me. He was showing me a piece of his past, a wound that clearly had never healed. The story wasn't an apology, but it was something more. It was a context. It was the key to the fury I had seen in his eyes. He hadn't just seen a business liability in that ballroom. He had seen a ghost. I'm not your sister, Ji-han, I said softly. His eyes snapped back to mine, sharp and focused.
No, he said.
You're not. He reached out and tucked a stray curl behind my ear. His fingers were cold against my skin. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender it made my breath catch. You are my wife. And Park Min-joon saw you tonight. He saw Miller put you in handcuffs. He saw me react. He will interpret that as a weakness he can exploit. The danger wasn't over. It had just begun. The police captain was a stray dog. Park Min-joon was a wolf. What do we do? I asked, the we slipping out naturally. A flicker of something, surprise? Approval. Crossed his face. For now, you will not be alone. My driver will take you to your classes. Someone will be with you at all times. My world, already small, was about to shrink to the size of a gilded cage. I should have been angry, resentful. Instead, a strange sense of security settled over me. The thought of being alone after tonight was a far more terrifying prospect. And what about you? I asked. I will be handling Mr. Park, he said, and the cold finality in his tone told me everything I needed to know about Park Min-joon's future. He was about to turn away when I made a choice. I could let him walk away, let us retreat back to our separate, silent corners of this penthouse. Or I could close the distance. I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. His muscles tensed under my touch. He looked down at my hand, then back up at my face, his expression unreadable. Thank you, I said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened tonight. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for telling me why. He stared at me for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken things. Then he slowly covered my hand with his own. His was large and warm, engulfing mine completely. Go and get some rest, Aaliyah, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. He said my name differently than anyone else. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical thing, something he seemed to shape and hold before releasing it. He let go of my hand and walked away, disappearing down the hallway toward his office. I stood there for a long time, my fingers tingling where he had touched them. The penthouse was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the presence of the man in the other room, a dangerous, complicated man who had just drawn me into the very center of his world. And I had just made the conscious choice not to run. I had chosen to stay. That was the moment everything changed.